Maybe it's because I try to be as close to Ohio State football as possible, watching all of their games, following several analysts and insiders and fellow YouTube channels, and maybe it's because I'm young. In fact, that is probably the biggest reason why I have this perception that Ryan Day is one of the most successful head coaches in recent memory, and yet I have never seen someone get the type of hate or a coach of his stature have the type of controversy that he does. Let me color in what I'm saying to you. Ryan Day is 70-10 at Ohio State and 46-5 in Big Ten conference play. And yet, not just how Ohio State fans have talked about him, or maybe will inevitably talk about him when he loses another game, happens to the best of us, but how national outlets have talked about him, how other fans, how people from other fan bases insiders have talked about him is quite fascinating. And I want to talk about in this video why Ryan Day is both elite, and he should be viewed in an elite manner, and he is one of the top coaches in the sport, and this year he's in the running to possibly be the top coach in the sport, but also explain why he's controversial. And he is. I don't really find him to be all that controversial personally, especially as a person, but as a coach and as an idea, Ryan Day does have some controversy with him among everyone, not just non-Ohio State fans, but Ohio State fans themselves. And I'm going to explain why in this video. But before we get started, if you haven't already, we have a lot of Buckeye followers, but we can never have enough of you. And if you aren't a Buckeye, we can never have enough college football fans. We're trying to hit 100,000 subscribers and become the next thing on YouTube, the next biggest college football channel on YouTube. A lot of ground to make up, but I'm confident we can do it. So get us started by hitting that subscribe button and liking the video, and also hit the notification bell, not just for my channel, but also for the Ohio State football and college football podcasts that'll be linked in the description. That way, if you primarily want to hear me when I talk about Ohio State football, you can get notifications for when I only make Buckeye content or Buckeye-related content, or you can just get the notifications when I make any content at all. We talk college football and Big Ten, SEC, Ohio State, and a bunch of other teams here on College Football with Sam, and release a plethora of content daily. So do those things and watch along. And I'm excited for you to join our journey of trying to become the next big thing on YouTube, and also this video and many other videos. So thank you so much for doing those things. They're all free. And comment your thoughts on Ryan Day as a head coach down below. I want to hear your thoughts. So, again, Day is a controversial and elite head coach, and I want to emphasize the elite part, and that's what I'm going to start off with. Because I personally, others would disagree, I personally think he is a very likable coach, and I think he is an elite coach at the same time. I think that's why he recruits well. I think that's why he has built the culture he has. I think it is one of the best, if not the best, cultures in college football. The players love him. It feels like, whether it's currently Matt Patricia going on a recruiting spree and doing well, or James Laurinaitis or Matt Guerreri doing that. These are mainly defensive coaches, because we all know and have known for years that Hartline's an elite recruiter, or whether it's Tyler Bowen, or whether it's Keenan Bailey or Carlos Loughlin. It feels like a lot of these players don't just commit because many of their position coaches are good, or because of the Ohio State brand, or because of their reputation. It feels like Day is a likable, trustable person that you can believe in, that you can confide in with, that you can have conversations with. Ryan Day has never really struck me as this super egotistical maniac, or this mean guy, or a guy who will pushes players to a brink that isn't good, or try to cut corners in a negative way, because sometimes you do have to cut corners, but cutting corners in a negative way to win. He doesn't do things to hurt his players, is what I'm saying. He is one of those coaches, despite being young, and I think other guys like Marcus Freeman are like this, where they want to make their players into better men, better people, not just better football players. So I just want to get that out of the way. I think he is more elite than controversial, and I also wanted to just bring up some of my own personal thoughts about him because it's important. I'm someone who, even when Ryan Day was receiving harsh criticism last year, and I even said I understood why people wanted him to be fired, but it didn't make sense. And then after 2023 and 2022 and 2021, yeah, of course, the endings to those seasons were not ideal, but that didn't make him a coach who wasn't outside of the top 5, or certainly not outside the top 10. I had no idea why last year the ESPN consensus preseason ratings for head coaches were that Ryan Day was the 10th best head coach. That was moronic. And this is coming from someone who has criticized Day before. I have not painted him to be Nick Saban or painted him to be this godlike figure. He isn't. He is not Nick Saban. He is not the second coming. But I don't think anyone is Nick Saban at this point. And of course, no one's the second coming. So come on. There's this thing in college football where it's like how people say the word generational is used too often or elite is used too often. Sometimes I even fall for that. More so elite, less so for generational. Generational is uncommon, but with the caliber of athletes and how recruiting in recent memory has often piled up for select few schools, it's more common, I would say, on a year-to-year basis than some people believe, especially if we're talking about like college elite or college generational, not Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, and Justin Jefferson generational. Like, that isn't just generational. That's a once or twice thing in a century, what happened with that trio, for example. Not to get off on too much of a tangent, but the point being that Ryan Day is going to be remembered as one of the better head coaches in Ohio State history, and that says a lot because Ohio State is a blue blood. They have been the most consistent program since World War II, and depending on whether you view consistency or ceiling as the absolute best, it's either Ohio State or Alabama as the best program of all time. And if you would prefer consistency, you go with Ohio State. If you prefer ceiling, you go with Alabama. But part of that may be that they happen to get Nick Saban and Bear Bryant both to be head coaches at their school for well over a decade and close to 2 decades for Saban, over 2 decades for Bear Bryant. Day cannot be viewed as anything else than elite because of his resume. Just look at some of these numbers on your screen here, and if you can't see them, I'll read them out to you anyway. 70-10 overall, 46-5 in Big Ten play. He's 5-3 in the CFP, and those 3 CFP losses came to Clemson in 19, who finished 14-1, would have been 15-0 if not for LSU existing. 2020 Bama, who would have been 15-0, but they were instead 13-0 due to the COVID year, but that was one of the greatest teams of all time too. Just look at it analytically. The other loss was to a 2022 Georgia team that finished 15-0. And while I think they were one of the weakest, if not the weakest, national champions since 2020 Bama, I think they were weaker than 24 Ohio State and 23 Michigan when you look at their ceiling. Floor-wise, they were probably a little bit higher than Ohio State, but ultimately I would take 2024 Ohio State from what they produced in the playoffs, 2021 Georgia, and 2023 Michigan overall over that 2022 UGA team. They still won the Natty. They still went 15-0. They still plastered TCU in a way that I don't think anyone else that year could have, except for maybe a healthy 2022 Ohio State. And Day, against Clemson and against Georgia, was quite literally inches and a few decisions collectively away from winning those 2 games and potentially winning 2 national championships for Ohio State. His record against the FPI top 10 is 13-7. This is end of year FPI. So after the games have been factored in, 13-7. Lost to 2019 Clemson, to 2020 Alabama, to 2021 Michigan, to 2022 Michigan, and 2022 Georgia. Then 2023 Michigan, and then you have, last but not least, Oregon, 2024 Oregon. All of those teams, all of them except for, I believe, last year's Oregon, finished in the top 5 or top 4 of FPI. when you're only losing to the top 5 power rated teams and not really anyone else, except for a few instances like Oregon in 21, Missouri in 23, Michigan in 24, you are an elite head coach. You are. And 2 of those teams, Missouri and Oregon, had 10 wins and finished in the FPI top 25. I mean, Day has only lost to 1 team in his 80 games played that was a non-top 25 FPI team. And it was a team in a rivalry game where they matched up well with Ohio State in the trenches. Ohio State, for some reason, as the tale goes, decided they wanted to win in the trenches. I don't know why. And that Michigan team, if they had better QB play, probably would have been top 15 or maybe even top 10 in the power ratings at the end of the year because they were playing much better at the end than they were in the beginning. And watching games will tell you that. Day has 13 wins against the FPI top 10. Let's see if I can name these off the top of my head. Wisconsin twice in 2019, Penn State twice in 2019, or not twice, but once. I think that was it for 2019, but I could be wrong. In 2020, Clemson, so that's 4. In 2021, didn't get any wins against the FPI top 10. In 2022, he beat Penn State, that's 5. In 2023, he beat Notre Dame and Penn State, that's 7. And then in 2024, you had Oregon the second time around, you had Indiana and Penn State in the regular season, and then you had Tennessee, you had Texas, and you had Notre Dame. That's your 13 right there. Could name those off the top of my head as well. So, and I remember bits and pieces, or even multiple plays, drives, and quarters from all of those games. And the wins that Day has had against the FPI top 10 in his tenure at Ohio State have been far more toward the dominant side, while his losses have been far closer towards the, well, it could have gone either way, or it was a competitive loss side. So it's not like he's winning some fluke games or having individual players carry his team to success, and then he gets exposed in these other games. It's more like maybe small weaknesses here and there get exposed, but only by the most elite coaching staffs, and then everyone else, and occasionally even the elite coaching staffs and rosters, he just dominates and beats straight up. I mean, he is one of the best, and the fact that he has a national title along with it, and has made the playoffs several times, the 4-team iteration, not just the 12-team iteration, and some other things as well, like the fact that I think he is better than Urban Meyer was with Ohio State, is total evidence that he is an elite head coach. Day's teams have higher floors and higher ceilings with tougher circumstances. The only pushback that you can give me on this fact is, oh, well, what about the record versus Michigan? That's it. And I will tell you that I think 2023 Michigan and 2022 Michigan in particular, and even the 2021 Wolverines, with what they had, would have beaten most of Urban Meyer's teams at Ohio State. And let's say you're someone who believes that cheating had a massive, massive impact here. Then you can't hold that against Ryan Day. You can't hold the Michigan record against Ryan Day. You can't do that and then say that the only reason or the biggest reason Michigan won was Connor Stallions. You have to pick one or the other. If the cheating was why Michigan won, or the primary reason why, then yeah, Urban would have lost to those teams because Michigan had that massive advantage, if that's your opinion. If your opinion is mine, and I know some Ohio State fans believe this, that yes, Michigan had some type of advantage, but it was much smaller than a lot of people say, and Michigan more so won because of matchups, and then in 2023 they were just the better, more talented, way more developed overall team at home, then yeah, a lot of Urban's teams probably still would have lost just because of how those Michigan teams finished in power ratings and their performances throughout their seasons. So Day has faced a tougher conference than Urban Meyer has. The Michigan teams he's played have been much better on an average basis. Never had to play Brady Hoke. Never had to play a Michigan team the caliber of 2017 outside of last season. Every team that Day played, except for that team, was better than 2017, probably better than 2015, definitely better than any Michigan team before that. And Penn State has been better in recent memory than they ever have been before under Franklin. Like, Penn State finally has competent line of scrimmage play, and yet Day is undefeated against James Franklin. And Day just went through a playoff gauntlet that, given how 2014, I think, was more of a down year than some years in the later 2010s, like 2019, one of the strongest years in recent memory, Day has gone through a tougher playoff gauntlet. I think right now, Day has already surpassed Urban. I really do think that. I really do believe that. Yes, Urban Meyer had a better record in big games, mostly because of his undefeated, really legendary streak against Michigan. However, and it's very important, and Day needs to beat Michigan. He does. And I know that last year he didn't and still won it all, but that's because that team was senior laden. They had an elite DC in Jim Knowles, a veteran OC in Chip Kelly, and they just had a lot of things that went for them that they won't have every year because you don't have that many seniors every year. That doesn't happen anymore with the transfer portal especially. But regardless of that, he is a better program builder. Urban Meyer, he didn't last more than a decade at most places. Like, Florida eventually fizzled out, went to Ohio State and retired, and then left Bowling Green in Utah after he quickly built them up. Day is a guy who can stay at Ohio State for 10 or 20 more years after today's date, after this coming season, and win Ohio State multiple national titles. And again, his teams have higher floors. They haven't lost in a blowout fashion to Iowa or Purdue, and they have higher ceilings as well. The 2024 team in the postseason just showed a type of edge to them at times that I think we saw in 2014 and maybe 15 after the MSU loss. But I've also seen Ryan Day teams on offense just take over for a defense that is failing to live up to expectations. I've seen in 2023 or in parts of 2024 when the offense is being put in a blender or is a mess, that some elite Ohio State defenses under Day have stepped up to kind of take over and take the show away. Like the Texas game last year, where it was really Ohio State's defense in a lot of ways that helped Ohio State win that game with the goal line stand, the scoop and score, forcing Texas into some uncomfortable fourth down attempts and holding them to 14 points, holding Sark. I mean, the Michigan loss last year, what do you want Jim Knowles and the defense to do? They held Michigan to 13 points, and 10 of those points came on just Michigan drives that were less than 10 yards for Michigan to score. So, and then, I could just go on and on and on. Like, Ohio State under Ryan Day is in a really good position moving forward. This could easily be the best program in America. Currently, right now, if we were to just look at what happened in 2024 and the momentum that's going on right now, I'd say it is the best program. If you're not going to take a large sample of the past and you're not going to project in the future, right now Ohio State's the number one program. They came off a national championship. They were number one in power ratings to end the year. They have a top 3 talent roster. They have a top 2 head coach. They have a great staff. Yes, they replaced a lot of guys, but they made a lot of good hires. And they have a wonderful culture, great elite developmental program. Right now, in the here and now, they are the number one program in football, and that is because of Ryan Day. Now I want to get into some of the reasons why he's controversial, because I think there is controversy that I didn't quite understand, but I think after last season, especially after that Michigan game, and I know they went on to win the title, but I began to understand the controversy more, and from my perspective, it hasn't quite gone away. It just hasn't. I feel like a lot of people did the whole roller coaster exercise when Day, lost to Michigan, then won it all. And I just kind of, there were some bumps in the road, but I just kind of maintained the same opinion about him overall. Thought after the Michigan game, oh boy, they may not win it all. I didn't predict them to win it all initially, although after the Oregon game, I thought it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to. Or initially didn't think they'd win it all, but thought they'd at least beat Tennessee in pretty solid fashion, that Day would stick around and still eventually probably win the Natty after making some staff changes. And then they won it all. I said, yup, Yeah, he's still the offensive savant who knows how to put together a good staff, and his guys play for him, and he gets really hot in the playoffs. So that right there, it's great. It's awesome. And Ohio State will celebrate that national championship and how impressive it was for a while. And they'll probably win one soon. I don't think they'll have to go a decade like they did from 14 to 24. They won't have to go a decade to wait for another one, I don't believe, under Ryan Day. But here's why he's controversial. His record versus Michigan. This is controversial because he's 1-4 overall, because he's on a 4-game losing streak. And it's also because the type of teams he's lost to. 2021 Michigan, for example, the way they lost to Georgia was embarrassing for Michigan, but on another hand, some could say it was embarrassing for Ohio State too. And then in 2022, Michigan was a team that played in a lot of close games and pulled away in the second half. They lost to TCU, and Ohio State could have pulled away from Michigan in the first quarter, if probably for better play calling and game preparation, but they melted down. Michigan came back, and Michigan won. In 23, I don't count that loss as anything embarrassing whatsoever. That Michigan team went 15-0 and was the first team since 2001 Miami to hold a halftime lead over all of their opponents. It was on the road. Michigan had the superior overall roster. They were just, from my perspective, Ohio State was lucky to not lose that game by double digits. I think the fact they played that game close while losing the turnover battle was admirable and spoke that, Day prepared for the game more than adequately and that his players showed up and played. And then in 2024, that was the real kicker for a lot of people. There were people everywhere calling for Day to be fired, which is so interesting because I mentioned earlier 70-10, and he was 66-10 after that game. Now, why would you fire a coach who's 66-10? Like, I get it from the emotional fan standpoint, but if he instead today was 67-11, beat Tennessee but lost to Oregon, or he beat Oregon, let's go more realistic. He's 68-11. He beats Oregon, still crushes them, but let's say that Texas doesn't allow the screen pass and then they kick the field goal instead of having to go for it in 4th and goal, and it's 17-14 and Texas wins. Like, from my perspective, why, like, that doesn't change much. I mean, yes, he doesn't have the title, and yes, he wouldn't be viewed as great, and that's totally fair, but at the same time, he's always had Ohio State in striking distance to win it all. However, 1-4 against Michigan is Ohio State's worst since Cooper, and Michigan is 3-1 versus Day as an underdog, and I think that's the main thing. Outside of 2019, when Michigan was a big underdog and Ohio State still covered and won, in 21, 22, and 24, Ohio State was favored by a little bit more than a touchdown to double digits, and I think briefly in 2022, they were favored by 2 scores, like about 9 points, and Michigan didn't just cover. Michigan won outright and covered the spread in all of those games by 20-plus points. So the fact that Day has been expected to win Michigan, win that game, beat them comfortably, and most of the time he's not just been beaten, he's been beaten comfortably, or the spread has been covered against him comfortably, and the game plans have looked off. It's not just confusing and frustrating for Ohio State fans, it's confusing and frustrating to national pundits and analysts and fans who like Day, or who in their mind see that Ohio State should beat Michigan, or they're predicted to, and they don't. And that causes confusion and therefore some controversy. Up next is the program makeup. And this is a weird one, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. It's so weird. I think the culture's elite, and it's one of the best in football. And I think this ties in well because Ohio State, I think, in a lot of fronts, is an exception to the rule. They're the only school north of the Mason-Dixon line outside of Oregon who's just recently entered this conversation. They're the only school north of the Mason-Dixon line, minus now Oregon, who has recruited at an SEC caliber. The only one. That's kind of an exception to the rule. And they have a lot of pipelines in the South, for example. They are the only school I can remember that has had this type of generational wide receiver rooms over and over and over and over again. And they're the only team in recent memory who, they lost 2 games and won the national title in as dominant fashion as they did. Like there's a lot of things that Ohio State does, often more for good than for bad, that a lot of other schools just don't or can't do. And I think this is another one of them. The culture is elite, but I feel like sometimes the team identity is consistent. Take last year, for example. They wanted to run a more run-heavy system all year, and initially it looked like it was going to work because the offensive line looked awesome, but the minute it got injured, it was never going to work, and yet they stuck with it for so often, and it cost them the Michigan game. It nearly cost them the Nebraska game, and somewhat worked against Penn State, but Penn State still played them within a score. And then they go out in the title, and they decide they want to go more pass-heavy, and they want to open it up rather early. They want to take deep shots. They want to use more motion. And while they still ran the ball, especially against Notre Dame, they did it in a more tactical way. They didn't just run the ball because that's what they wanted to do. They did it when they thought they could catch the defense off guard or when they thought it could benefit them. They also ran Will Howard more in the playoffs, which makes sense. It's your team's final few games, and you don't really have to worry about quarterback injury like you do in the regular season. But we've seen this in 2023 before. Is Hartline going to call plays? Is Day going to call plays? Well, we don't get an answer, and then Day's calling the plays, and the offense looks like a mess overall, and they're more of a defensive-led team. And then in 2022, it's a continuation of the 2021 team in a lot of regards. They improve on defense, but their offense tries to run the football more, even with an injured running back room. And even with wide receivers that, outside of Jackson Smith and Jigba being hurt, were fairly healthy and up for much of the year and playing elite football. So I get that identities, of course, this is a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because you have to change your identity. You have to tweak it to go along with your roster. You have to do that. You have to. I mean, and I've seen Ryan Day teams do this in a very wise sense, where they change things to adapt to their current team situation. But I've also seen them change their identity for reasons I can't that I don't know why they did that. For example, I don't know why Day rolled out the game plan he did against Michigan. That doesn't make any sense at all. I don't know why Ohio State stubbornly, for so long against Nebraska, they eventually figured it out at the end, but for so long they kept trying to run the football when it was clear that it was just never going to work. And yet they tried it over and over and over and over again. Or I could go back to the 2022 Michigan game. Why the penalties? Why passing it to Stover on 4th and 2? Why do that, for example? What happened in the fourth quarter of the 2022 Georgia game, getting all conservative? And then, of course, this season, things are rectified. And then yet again, what happened in the fourth quarter against Notre Dame, where they nearly came back? What was that about? Of course, Day is an elite head coach. This is not me saying, oh, well, the good and the bad are in equal parts. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is this is another reason why he's controversial. There's some up and down with his team and with his team's identities throughout the years. Like last year's team at the beginning of the year, it looked like, okay, maybe the Chip Kelly, more spread option, more run heavy offense would work. And then Simmons went down tragically, and it didn't for the rest of the year. And even in the playoffs, when against Notre Dame they ran the ball well, it was against an injured Notre Dame front, and their defense was changing coverage. Why? Because they were terrified of the wide receivers. And you should be. And the fact that it took them until the playoffs to really figure out how to use the wide receivers was mind-boggling. So those are some reasons why he's controversial. But ultimately, he's an elite head coach, and his eliteness overshadows the controversy. I mean, every college football head coach right now has a level of controversy to them. Think about Kirby Smart and Georgia's off-the-field issues. Think about Dan Lanning and how until really last year it seemed like he tried so hard to be aggressive and it always ended up shooting Oregon in the foot. Think about Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Toward the end of his tenure, he was regarded as an elite head coach, and then you had the whole sign stealing scandal. You had games where they came out flat every time in the playoffs. Every single time they came out flat, didn't play all that well. And then you had, even Nick Saban toward the end. I don't know how 2023 Alabama turned out the way it did with how talented their roster was. There were things lacking there, and that certainly would have been a controversial, especially inside of Alabama circles. But then again, I have never seen a head coach like Ryan Day, who's had the success he's had, and yet nationally, not just among Big Ten fans or among Ohio State fans, nationally, you can ask fans, almost any fan, and they will give you an opinion that I feel like is very positive towards Day or negative towards Day, and maybe there's somewhere in between, but they're tainted by something that they view as maybe a bigger issue than it is, or as something that is an issue, like let's say the Michigan record, but at the end of the day, it doesn't overshadow the fact that he's won 70 games and he's on pace to, I think, win 100 games or very close to it within two to three seasons, which is crazy, and beating several elite teams, and they're always recruiting at a top 5 level. It's just, I have nothing but praise, really, for Ryan Day's program, and I think they're going to win it all sometime in these next 5 years, if not sooner than that. And heck, maybe in the next 5 years they win 2 national championships. We'll see. Wonderful hire by Ohio State, one of the best hires in recent memory in college football, I think, and it's my firm belief that Ryan Day is going to be at Ohio State forever.